My mom emptied my savings to pay my sister's debt. Then I froze everything. The morning I found out, I was still in my work clothes. It was a Tuesday, March 14th, 2023, and I had just pulled a 12-hour shift at the logistics warehouse in the south end of Columbus, Ohio. My boots were still muddy. My phone still smelled like diesel. I sat down at the small kitchen table in my apartment, cracked open my banking app the way I always did at the end of a shift, and for a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. Not because I was confused. I understood exactly what I was looking at. I understood it immediately, and that was the worst part. The account balance read $47.12. 3 weeks before that moment, it had read $23,400. My savings. 4 years of double shifts, skipped vacations, bagged lunches, and no new anything.
Gone.
Transferred in a single transaction. And the name on the receiving account? My mother's.
I didn't call her that night.
I didn't cry. I just sat there in my muddy boots under the fluorescent kitchen light, and I made a decision so cold and so deliberate that people who know me still can't fully believe I went through with it. I froze everything. And what happened over the next 18 months changed not just my financial life, it changed the entire dynamic of my family forever. Columbus, Ohio is the kind of city that doesn't ask for your sympathy. It moves, it grinds, it hands you what you earn and nothing more. The East Side neighborhood where I grew up, Linden, is the kind of place where people work 2 jobs and still fall behind. The corner stores close early. The streetlights flicker. And every summer, someone else you knew from school ends up in a situation they can't talk their way out of. I was 26 years old when all of this happened. I had been renting a 1-bedroom apartment off Cleveland Avenue for about 2 years. It wasn't much. Thin walls, a window that let in wind in January no matter how much weather stripping I added, a radiator that clanked all night like it was trying to escape. But it was mine.
Fully mine.
No roommates. No one else's name on the lease. That mattered to me in a way that's hard to explain unless you grew up with 5 people in a house with 1 bathroom and a father who left when you were 11. I worked at Midwest Freight Solutions, a mid-sized logistics company that ran distribution routes through central Ohio. I started there as a loader in the fall of 2019, 2 months after I dropped out of Columbus State after my financial aid got delayed and my part-time job at the gas station was enough to cover the gap. I was supposed to go back. I told myself every 6 months that I was going back. But the warehouse paid $18.50 an hour with overtime, and after 18 months, they promoted me to a coordinator position that pushed it closer to $24. So I stayed. I built a routine around the work, around the savings, around a quiet, predictable life that I was genuinely proud of. My family lived about 20 minutes away, my mother, my younger sister Deja, and my grandmother, who had been in poor health since 2021. They lived in the house my mother had rented for nearly 15 years, on the north end of the city, on a street where most of the neighbors kept their porch lights on all night. I visited most Sundays.
Brought food sometimes.
Fixed things when they broke. Paid for my grandmother's prescriptions twice when my mother said money was tight. That was normal. That was just how it worked in our family. I was the one who had it together. I was the one who could be counted on. What I didn't know, what no one had bothered to tell me, was how deep Deja was in. When people found out what my mother had done, the reactions split almost perfectly down the middle. And not in the way you'd expect. Half the people I told, coworkers, a couple of cousins, told me I was overreacting. They said it with that calm, practiced certainty that people use when they want to sound reasonable while still telling you that you're wrong. She's your mother. That was the most common one. Said like it was an argument in itself. She's your mother, so whatever she did, you need to let it go. My coworker Marcus, who I used to eat lunch with every day for 2 years, looked me dead in the face and said, "Man, that's what family does. You got it, she needed it. That's just how it is." I stopped eating lunch with Marcus after that. Then there were the people who laughed. Not cruelly, just that uncomfortable laughter that fills the space when something is too awkward to process. My cousin Trina, who I'd always been close to, said, "You're really gonna freeze out your own mama over money?" Like the amount didn't matter. Like $23,000 was something you find in a coat pocket. What burned the most was hearing secondhand that my mother had already told her version of the story to the extended family before I'd told anyone a single word. Her version, apparently, was that I had agreed to help and that I was now acting funny about it after the fact. She had a 3-day head start on the narrative. By the time I started talking, half the family already had a picture in their heads of me as the ungrateful son who helped his sister out of trouble and then threw it back in everyone's faces. But here's what no one in that narrative mentioned. I hadn't agreed to anything. No one had asked me. No one had called, texted, or knocked on my door. There was no conversation. There was no emergency call at 2 in the morning with tears and begging that I might have at least had the chance to respond to. There was just a transfer.
Silent.
Unannounced. Executed while I was at work on a Tuesday morning from a joint savings account I had stupidly, trustingly, never closed after my mother's name was added to it years ago to help with my grandmother's medical paperwork. That small, forgotten detail. That one loose administrative thread. That was the door they walked through. Here's who I am because I think it matters. My name is Daniel. I'm not someone people typically notice in a room. I'm average height, quiet by nature, and I've been told more than once in my life that I seem like I'm always somewhere else in my head even when I'm standing right in front of you. I'm not antisocial. I just think more than I talk. I always have. Growing up, I was the kid who read the fine print on things. While other kids in my neighborhood were outside, I was inside reading the manual for whatever appliance we'd gotten secondhand, or going through the utility bills my mother left on the kitchen counter, trying to understand why the numbers kept changing. I was 10 years old the first time I figured out we were being overcharged by the electric company, and told my mother. She laughed it off. The charge stayed. That stayed with me. I'm not a finance guy by training. I don't have a degree or a certification or a LinkedIn profile with buzzwords on it. What I have is an almost pathological need to understand how systems work and a very long memory for what happens when you trust the wrong ones. I had been burned before in smaller ways. A landlord who kept my deposit. A loan I co-signed for a friend in 2020 that he stopped paying after 3 months. I learned each time. I adjusted. I built walls where windows had been. The savings account was supposed to be the safest thing I had. $23,412. I know the exact amount because I used to open the app sometimes, not to do anything with it, just to look. Not out of greed. Out of something closer to disbelief. That I had built something solid. That I had done it alone, without anyone handing me anything. That it was real. And then one Tuesday morning it wasn't. What people underestimated about me, what they always underestimate about quiet people, is that there is a difference between being patient and being passive. I had been patient my whole life. I was done being patient. Let me tell you about the year that changed how I think about money, because without it, none of what comes next makes sense. It was 2020. The pandemic had just hit, and the warehouse had cut my hours to part-time for about 6 weeks while they figured out new safety protocols. I was 23. I had about $400 saved. My rent was $750 a month. I remember sitting in that same apartment, different furniture, same thin walls, and doing the math over and over, as if repeating it would somehow change the numbers. I started watching everything I could find about personal finance, not the motivational stuff, not the 10 steps to millionaire content, but the real, procedural, dry information. How bank accounts actually work. What joint account ownership means legally. What happens to money during disputes. How creditors collect. How protection mechanisms work. I had a lot of free time and a deep, sudden fear, and I used the way I always use fear, to learn something. I found a channel run by a former banking compliance officer out of Atlanta. He didn't have a flashy setup. Just a ring light, a bookshelf, and a calm voice that walked through scenarios that most people never think about until they're already inside them. I watched every video he had published, about 90 at the time. I took notes in a spiral notebook I still have somewhere. Topics like what it means to be a joint account holder versus a beneficiary, how to legally remove someone from an account, how a freeze works and who can request one, the difference between a hard freeze and a soft freeze, how to document unauthorized transfers for a potential dispute. I wasn't planning anything. I was just learning. The way I always learned, ahead of the need, without knowing exactly what the need would be. After hours were restored at the warehouse and the immediate financial pressure eased, I used that knowledge to do two things. First, I opened a completely new savings account, solo, no one else's name, at a credit union on the east side that a coworker had mentioned. Second, I started transferring the majority of my savings there, slowly over several months, moving it away from the old joint account at the regional bank where my mother's name still sat from years back. But I didn't close the old account. That was my mistake. I kept about $23,000 there. I thought having a well-established account with a longer history would help me eventually if I applied for a mortgage. I was playing a long game, and I underestimated a much shorter one. I also learned something else during those months of research. I learned that in Ohio, joint account holders have equal legal access to the funds. Both names on the account, both people can withdraw, in full, at any time, with no requirement for consent from the other holder. There is no law that says the money has to belong equally to both parties. There's no mechanism that flags a withdrawal as disproportionate. The bank doesn't know whose paycheck built the balance. It just sees two names and one request. My mother knew this too. I don't know if she researched it or if someone told her, but she knew it and she used it. The irony is that the same year of learning that was supposed to protect me had also, without my knowing it, shown me exactly how someone could get around me. I just never thought that someone would be her. Let me walk you through what actually happened with Deja, because the full picture is darker than most people realize. My sister was 22 at the time. She had been living at my mother's house since dropping out of high school at 17, working occasional retail jobs. Nothing stable. I didn't judge that. Not everyone finds their footing on the same timeline. But over the course of 2021 and 2022, Deja had gotten involved with a man, I'll call him Reese, who was, to put it plainly, running a debt cycle through her. Reese had introduced Deja to payday lending in early 2021. Small amounts at first, a few $100s here and there to cover gaps when her retail hours got cut. Those balances rolled over. The fees compounded. By mid-2022, according to what I later pieced together from my mother and from Deja herself, Deja owed close to $8,000 across 3 different payday lenders. That's a significant amount for someone without stable income. And Reese, who had apparently co-signed 2 of those loans, was now facing his own collection pressure and pushing that pressure onto Deja. But it gets more complicated. Deja had also, at some point in 2022, put a credit card in my mother's name without my mother's full understanding of the terms. I'm not sure how much my mother knew or didn't know. What I know is that by January 2023, there was a credit card debt of roughly $6,200 attached to my mother's name, with a collection agency beginning to make calls. And there was a threat, whether real or exaggerated, I still don't know, that if the payday loan debts weren't resolved, Reese's people would show up at the house. My mother panicked. I understand that. She is a woman who has spent her entire adult life responding to crises with whatever was available. She saw $23,000 sitting in an account with her name on it, and she saw a way out of a situation that felt impossible. She withdrew $22,900 on the morning of March 14th. She paid off Deja's debts in full, the payday loans, the credit card, and apparently gave Reese several $1,000s in cash to keep the peace, though I've never gotten a full accounting of where every dollar went. She did not ask me. She did not tell me. She left $47 in the account and went about her day. The real problem wasn't just the money. The real problem was the years behind it, the years of me being the available one, the capable one, the one whose stability was treated as a community resource rather than a personal accomplishment. The money was the symptom. What it pointed to was a dynamic that had been building for my entire adult life, and that I had never once confronted directly, because I didn't want to be the person who put a price on family. But someone else had already done that. They'd just done it without asking me. I spent 72 hours doing almost nothing. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Deja. I didn't post anything. I sat in my apartment, I went to work, I came home, and I thought. On the 3rd day, I opened that spiral notebook, the one from 2020, the one with all the compliance officer's lessons, and I read it cover to cover. And I found the thing I needed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a loophole or a legal weapon. It was a principle that I had written down almost as an afterthought at the bottom of a page. The most powerful financial position is not offense, it is strategic inaccessibility. I had written it while the man was explaining how high net worth individuals protect assets, not by hiding them, but by making them structurally unavailable. Not illegal, not hidden, just built in such a way that access requires deliberate, documented steps. You can't react to what you can't reach. It was the most honest thing I had said to anyone in months. I wasn't sure. I didn't know if going back meant undoing what I had built, returning to a dynamic where my steadiness was something other people budgeted around. I had started to understand, with some clarity, that my absence from Sunday dinners had caused more disruption in the family's financial ecosystem than my presence had ever caused. My mother had called my cousin for $200 the month before. She had asked her church friends for help with a utility bill. Not because she was destitute, she had income, she had resources, but because the comfortable assumption that Daniel would cover it was gone. And the family was starting to realize that what they had called Daniel helping out was actually a structure. An invisible structure that I had built and maintained for years without ever calling it what it was. The first sign that things were shifting wasn't dramatic. It was small. My cousin Trina, who had laughed at me back in March, called me in late May and asked quietly if I was doing okay. Not about the money.
About me.
It was the first time in years that anyone in my family had asked that question. That call lasted 45 minutes. It was the beginning of something. By December of 2023, 9 months after March 14th, my credit union savings account sat at $14,200. That number sounds small compared to what was taken, and it is. But the way I arrived at it was completely different from how I had built the original $23,400. The original balance had grown slowly over 4 years, largely untouched because I had no real plan for it. It was just accumulation by habit. This new balance was engineered. Every deposit was intentional. Every dollar had an assignment. I had opened a Roth IRA in August and was already at the contribution limit for the year. I had started a small emergency fund at a completely separate bank, only accessible via a physical branch, no online transfer capability, no debit card attached. Friction by design. I had also done something I hadn't expected to do. I had enrolled in a 6-week financial literacy course offered through a nonprofit on the west side of Columbus. Not because I needed the basics, I knew the basics better than most of the instructors, but because it put me in a room with other people who were rebuilding after loss, and that community, that shared language, was something I hadn't realized I was missing. The woman who ran the course, her name was Beverly, a 50-something retired credit counselor, pulled me aside after the 3rd session and said, "You're not here to learn. You're here to process." She wasn't wrong. I walked out of that course with 2 things I hadn't walked in with: a concrete 5-year plan written in a single spreadsheet and a meeting scheduled with a mortgage advisor. Not to buy immediately. To understand the timeline. To see the road ahead and know how far I'd already come. 9 months. $14,000. A Roth IRA. A sealed emergency fund. A mortgage consultation, and a financial life that no one could reach into without my knowing. I also, in December, finally called my mother. The phone call lasted almost 2 hours. I won't pretend it was clean or cinematic. There were long silences. There was crying on her end, and something close to it on mine. There was a moment where she said, "I thought you would understand." And I said, very carefully, "I might have if you had asked me." That landed. I could feel it through the phone. She had not realized fully what the joint account access meant in practice. She knew her name was on it. She knew she could access it. But she had built a story in her head where the access and the permission were the same thing, and no one had ever challenged that story directly because no one in our family had ever needed to. She also admitted, for the first time, that the situation with Deja had been building for over a year and that she had been too ashamed to tell me. That she had kept it from me not to deceive me, but because she knew I would have handled it differently, more carefully, more deliberately, and she had felt that the situation was too urgent for carefully. I told her I understood that too.
I did.
What I also told her, in the plainest language I could find, was that what she had done had ended something. Not our relationship, not permanently, but a version of our relationship. The version where my financial stability was a silent resource that could be drawn on without conversation, without consent, without accountability. That version was over. Not as punishment, as a fact. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You sound different." I said, "I am different." The reversal wasn't the family coming to apologize one by one, though some version of that did happen over the following months. The reversal was quieter than that. It was the shift in how
People spoke to me.
the way my cousin stopped making jokes about me being too uptight about money. The way my mother, the next time she was in a financial pinch, and there was a next time in February, called me first as a question instead of a transaction. She asked if I could help. I said I could help with a portion, and I transferred $300 that same day. It was a choice, not a default. And that difference between a choice and a default was everything. It is now the summer of 2025. I have $41,000 in savings across 3 accounts, each structured for a different purpose: liquidity, growth, and housing. My Roth IRA has grown to just under $9,000. My credit score, which had never been bad but had never been particularly strong, sits at 741, high enough that when I sat down with a mortgage advisor last fall, the conversation was about preference, not qualification. I am pre-approved up to $210,000 on a property purchase. I have not bought yet, but I know what I'm looking for, and I know what I can afford to the dollar. I still work at Midwest Freight Solutions. I was promoted again in early 2024 to operations lead, managing a team of 14, coordinating 2 distribution routes, $32 an hour plus quarterly performance bonuses. I left the Amazon job after 10 months, once my savings rebuild had enough momentum to sustain itself without the extra income. I started a small financial accountability group in 2024 for people, all from the warehouse, meeting twice a month at my apartment to review budgets and savings progress. No app, no brand, no social media. Just 4 people in a living room with laptops, holding each other to the numbers they wrote down. 2 of the 4 have since opened their first investment accounts. 1 just made an offer on a house. I can't take credit for their decisions. But I was the room where the decisions got made. Deja is doing better. She left Reese in the summer of 2023 and has been working a stable job in healthcare administration since early 2024. We text sometimes, short, cautious things, the way 2 people communicate when they're still deciding how much to trust each other. I don't hold it against her the way I used to. She was in a bad situation and she made bad decisions, and someone else paid for them. That's a thing that happens. What I hold to is that it doesn't have to keep happening. My grandmother passed away in October of 2024. She was 82. I was with her at the end. In her last weeks, she told me once, out of nowhere, that she was proud of how I had kept my head. I didn't know exactly what she meant at the time. I think I understand it better now. In the spring of 2025, my cousin Trina, the same one who had laughed at me 2 years before, called me and said her 17-year-old son wanted to talk to me. His name is Marcus, and he's the kind of kid who asks a lot of questions without knowing why he's asking them. He came over one Saturday afternoon, sat across from me at the same kitchen table where I had stared at a $47 balance 2 years before, and said he wanted to know how savings worked. Not in a general way. In a real way. What account, what bank, how much to put in, how often. I talked to him for 3 hours. I showed him the spreadsheet. I showed him the notebook from 2020. I showed him what a Roth IRA looks like in year 1. Not impressive, just starting. I told him about the compliance officer's YouTube channel and made him write down the name. I told him about joint accounts and what they mean legally. I did not tell him all of this would protect him from pain. I told him it would protect him from the specific pain of being caught unprepared for something predictable. He opened his first savings account the following week. $80 initial deposit. His own name, no one else's. The branch manager gave him a complimentary pen and a pamphlet about compound interest, and according to Trina, he read the pamphlet 3 times on the bus home. That's the thing about knowledge that actually matters. It doesn't stay with you. It can't. It moves. It finds the next person who's ready for it, and it keeps going. The spiral notebook from 2020 isn't mine anymore, really. It belongs to every conversation I've had at that kitchen table since. Every person who learned what a joint account means before they needed to. Every person who opened their own account alone with their own name and felt what I felt the day I first looked at a balance I had built myself. That feeling doesn't have a dollar amount, but it changes everything about how you move through the world. There's a version of the story where I stay angry, where I carry March 14th, 2023 like a stone in my pocket and use it to justify every wall I build and every bridge I refuse to cross. Some people expected that version of me. Some people, honestly, wanted me to be the cautionary tale about what happens when family goes too far and bitterness wins. But that's not what happened. What happened is that I took the worst financial moment of my adult life and turned it into the clearest thinking I have ever done about money, about trust, about the difference between love and access. Love doesn't require access to your savings account. Love doesn't come with the assumption that your stability belongs to someone else by default. Real love asks. It waits for an answer. It understands that what you have built is not a shared resource just because you are willing to share it. It is yours until you decide otherwise. I didn't freeze my family. I froze the assumption. And when I thought it out on my own terms with my own timeline, what grew back was something more honest than what had been there before. Less comfortable, maybe,
but honest.
Build the architecture first. Let the relationships fill in the space you choose to give them. And never, not for love, not for guilt, not for the quiet weight of being the one who can mistake being trusted with being available. Those are two very different things. And knowing the difference might be the most important savings account you ever open.